In this episode of RetroBlasting, we're not going to talk about an entire series. We're not going to talk about an entire toy line. I wanted to talk about a specific toy. I wanted to start a sub-series of videos for RetroBlasting called Plastic Fantastic, and this is the first episode. The challenge was, which toy do I choose? And naturally, I hadn't talked about the most important action figure line for boys in the 1980s, which was Hasbro's G.I. Joe. The line started in 1982, and it went all the way through the 90s. But there were so many action figure playsets and vehicles that it'll blow your mind just thinking about it. Which one do you start with? A G.I. Joe collector would tell you that the most impressive toy is the USS Flag, the aircraft carrier. I don't agree. I think the USS Flag is impressive in its size, but not a lot of children had it. With that in mind, I made my selection, and I chose the Killer Whale, better known as the Hovercraft. I received the Killer Whale in the Christmas of 1984, and I've had it to this day, not in this condition. It went through some restoration, which I'll get into in a minute. But I think the Killer Whale really epitomizes what the G.I. Joe toy line was all about. Massive vehicles with great details and playability, a bevy of gadgets, and they could hold tons of figures and they could occupy you for hours. What only adds to its charm is the fact that it was produced in the early years of the G.I. Joe line, before they went to neon colors. As you can see, this hovercraft is still army green, which they quickly got away from in subsequent years as they made the characters more flashy. The Killer Whale really is one of the greatest toys that Hasbro ever produced for the G.I. Joe line. Why don't we go through it together and you'll see what I mean. The G.I. Joe Killer Whale is one of the most iconic vehicles in Hasbro's line, and I think that's due to a combination of its design and its functionality. Not only is it a great plastic vehicle, but it can also float as a hovercraft in a body of water such as a swimming pool or a creek, which provided hours of fun for us when we were kids. The hovercraft was often featured on the G.I. Joe cartoon and in the comic book. The hovercraft boasts an impressive array of play features, including a spring-loaded recon sled, rotating machine gun turrets, removable maintenance hatches and a recon motorcycle, depth charges, working propellers, and working steering vanes. Like many of the vehicles in the G.I. Joe toy line, the Killer Whale also serves as a transport for many of your figures, so that you can deploy large amounts of ground troops to your next battle. Whether it's a mint-out-of-the-box example or a battle-worn one that you've restored, the Killer Whale always looks good when complete. The hovercraft comes with its pilot, Cutter, who's a great example of an understated design in the early figures from G.I. Joe. Because of the many battles and creek beds that mine encountered throughout childhood, I eventually had to restore mine last year. It took some time, and I had to break it down to all of its major components and then rebuild it from the ground up after a good cleaning. The results really paid off. There was one area, the steering vanes, which are so fragile, the only way I could repair them was through a little bit of Home Depot ingenuity. This repair method might seem unorthodox, but given the premium that you have to pay for real steering vanes that aren't broken on these hovercrafts, it was worth it. So now that we've talked about the fun stuff about the hovercraft, let's talk about the not so fun stuff. You can get these for sale all day on eBay, but they're probably going to have broken parts that need replacement, or they're going to be missing parts entirely. It seems like everything about this vehicle is fragile. I'm going to go front to back with you and show you everything that you need to watch out for. Sled ramp. Hinges on the front, often broken, sometimes one, sometimes both. The sled inside is sometimes missing, or its windshield is missing. Main front ramp. The mounting points for the ramp on the body tub itself are often broken. This one, as you can see, still has a piece of it left. Most of the time, they're just sheared off. The cannon nozzles are often missing. The cannon mounting points, if they are missing and you need a replacement, be careful, because the teeth on them, if they're from a used hovercraft, are often sheared off, in which case they won't latch. They'll just sit there loosely, and when you pull the cannon up, they'll pop out. The hatch itself, the main front hatch, hinges, often stressed and cracked or broken. The windows are easily lost because they pop out. Front machine guns. The hinges on the turrets can break and crack, leading you to have to replace the turrets. Missile launchers. The teeth on the bottom of the missile launcher boxes can break, in which case you won't be able to mount them to the arm. The conning tower glass is often missing. The depth charges are often missing. The recon bike is often missing, or missing a wheel, or both. And then the main culprit, and I'll turn this around so that you can see it again one more time. The steering vanes. Now, as you saw earlier, I was able to restore mine through an unconventional method, but for anyone looking for mint condition steering vanes, you're probably going to have to go mint in the box, because very rarely does one of these show up on eBay with the steering vanes intact and original for a loose example. They're just too fragile. They don't survive. The parts for this hovercraft are out there on eBay, depending on what you need, but you're just going to have to be patient and take your time. Mine was from childhood, and it had its own share of broken pieces and parts that were missing. I spent about 3 months on eBay and grabbed the right auctions and found the parts that I needed. But a hovercraft can be a beautiful addition to your G.I. Joe collection. For me, it's one of my centerpieces next to my Moray and my Sky Striker. It's a matter of how patient you're willing to be, but it's worth it.
G.I. Joe is the code name for America's daring, highly trained Special Mission Force. Its purpose, to defend human freedom against Cobra, a ruthless terrorist organization determined to rule the world. He never gives up.